morning, so how do you call people with autism? Because I would say a child with autism, and she said, no, we agree that it is autistic children that we say. So that's the name that is being used. Now, why are we having this? I think from the presentation that will take place, each person will introduce themselves before they speak. And from the presentation, I'm going to ask you, as you are listening to the presentation, figure out, why are we having this presentation? Of what significance is it to you as a pre-service teacher? What is your role in all of this as well? So really, I want to say thank you so much, even before we have the presentation, to the agreement to come and to share, not just the theory that you read in a book. And that is really what is stifling us so much. We go to the text, we go to the Google, we download, we do the assignment, and we say, voila, I've got 80%, I know it all. No, you don't. You have not felt it. You have not experienced it. And it's in our lived experiences and in our engagements that we really learn more. And we don't just learn more about what's around us, we learn more about ourselves. So in this presentation, try and answer the question, why are we having this? What can I do with regard to this? Thank you so much.
I'm Prashant Parsnath. I am the chairperson of Action in Autism, and I'm also autistic, and I'm here to talk to you about the work we do at Action in Autism and why it is so important. I'd like to introduce my next speakers. Thank you.
Lisa Aziz, and we have Azra Kassim, and we're both from Action in Autism. And it's really lovely to see all of you. I'm going to hand it over back to Prashant, who's going to be speaking to you as an autistic and as the chairperson of Action in Autism.
The world has changed. Toward the end of the 20th century, we thought that the internet was going to revolutionize everything we knew. And not just everything we knew, but everything we didn't yet know. And yet now, the world has been plunged into a state of mass misunderstanding, and we've seen it all around us. And this mass misunderstanding has affected every single aspect of our life. Nobody knows what's real anymore. Now I need you to think about those issues, and I need you to think about those difficulties, and I need you to multiply that by 100. Now that you've multiplied it by 100, I need you to multiply that by 1,000, and that by 100,000. That is autism. Now you'd think that not having social skills would be not much of an issue. I mean, you can still get things done. But even for vocal people like us, even though we can understand the language, even though we know how to use it sometimes, even though we know what people are saying, it's difficult to just get the message across. I wouldn't be here speaking to you today if it weren't for the work we do at Action in Autism. Coming back to the misunderstandings, even though I can understand the language and I know how to use it, everything I said, everything I have tried to do in my entire life has been misunderstood, has been set back, has been restricted, and nobody understood what I was trying to do, what I was trying to say, how I was trying to do it, or what they needed to help me with. And that's just the vocal autistics. So there are mainly 4 classifications that modern medicine knows. about autism. You get the nonverbal autistics, who are the people you are most familiar with. The people who are affected by the need to do things for themselves sometimes. And then you have the lower needs, or the non-vocals. So that's the non-verbal. You have the verbals like me, who, despite our abilities, have issues with social skills and communicating. And instead of not being able to communicate, everything we say and do is misunderstood, because we cannot build that sense of understanding with other people. So I've talked about nonverbal and verbal. Then there's the high support needs. High support needs are people that require help with everything they do. They can't dress themselves or feed themselves. So we work with those people as well, and mostly children. And we've learned that even though high support needs autistics and nonverbal autistics have issues, we have been able to develop insights to help them live independently. We have been able to help them read, develop ideas. They have such a sense of intelligence about them. In fact, if you think about every single idea we have about autism, we just don't have enough information. And that's where information gathering comes in. A lot of the new information we have on autism comes from places like Action in Autism. You know, it comes from people who've experienced it, from the parents, from the caregivers, even from the people themselves. I am the chairperson of Action in Autism, but I'm also an autistic person. I wouldn't be able to be doing all of this if it weren't for Action in Autism. So I've talked to you about the two so I've talked to you about three so far. Then there's the low needs autistics. Now, low needs autistics, there's a lot of contention about this. So one could argue that I'm a low needs autistic, but the fact is there's a big gap between what the literature says and what the lived experiences of autistic people are. So most low needs, I'd say, according to the journals, according to the medical documents, and according to the literature, says that low needs can live independently and don't need as much help. Well, that's just the thing. I've been to doctors, I've been to scientists, I've been to specialists. Action in Autism has organized therapy for me, and nobody could figure out what was going on. The main issue was that people with autism suffer from multiple mental illnesses at once. After the pandemic, society was inundated with a mental health crisis. And even before and during the pandemic, there was an issue, but now society has had the luxury of making mental illness a stigma, but they can no longer afford that. Companies, the public sector, every single entity you know of has had no choice but to take that into consideration. Depression rates, suicide. In fact, think of every single mental illness that a person has to think of, that has to deal with, and every single mental illness that these organizations have to deal with or think of. And we keep finding new information, and we find that the information we currently have, even the latest information, is not enough. So where does that leave us? It leaves us here and now. So I'm going to give you some new information. I'm somewhere between people like me. There are many more autistics like me who do not fit the stereotypes we see in the media. We've seen mostly, I think, in the gross out comedies or in many forms of media that autism is played for laughs. And we see that a lot. You know, I think we've seen the Big Bang Theory with the verbal or the low needs autistics. And we've seen things on the internet about, geniuses who don't know how to get dates and are lonely and sit in their basements living with their parents. Well, I got news for you. That's all of us now. You know, the world used to make fun of those people, but now the world has become the situation has become so bad that I think that a lot of us are now living in our parents' basements now. You know, right up until adulthood, many people have moved into their parents' basements. And it's not just that, it's just getting things done, getting a business, getting a degree. It takes 7 to 12 years to get a medical degree, and we are having a skills shortage. We have a shortage of doctors, psychologists, medical professionals, and that's just the high-up section. Right now we have issues in the basic sector where our infrastructure is crumbling. We have water issues, electricity issues. Hell, I bet we'll even have a load shedding incident sooner or later today. You know, we have issues, and the reason why I'm talking about this is that we have issues with passing on these skills and with teaching people. And a lot of our institutions do not understand how to treat people with even basic disabilities. Now imagine what happens when you have, imagine the difficulties it is just with one of these mental illnesses. With depression, or any developmental disorder, and you just have one of those things. Now imagine if they're stacked on top of each other. ADHD on top of depression, on top of schizophrenia, on top of 7 other issues. And our systems are not coping, and that's why Action in Autism is here. And I wouldn't have been able to graduate without them. So, we're here for support. Action in Autism, if you know people with autism, if you know families who are struggling, we have our communication details, we have our calendars here, which we're going to pass out to everyone. And if they need help, we are ready to help them. So, in conclusion, I'd like to say that even though life is tough, we can still get through it, and we can still get through it together. And that is what Action in Autism is for. So that's why we're here, because when you have these issues layered up on top of each other, systems need to adapt. We collect information to help people adjust, because I think from the 90s onward, we had like a 200 to 800% increase in the number of children and the number of people affected with autism. And some say that that's not even accurate. Some say that's undercounted because of the numbers of people who need our help. And the thing is, dealing with autism is important because it flows into other things. Because once you deal with these multiple health issues, you can learn how to deal with the single health issues more easily, and you can learn how to build skill sets. And if we learn how to help our people with disabilities, then that carries forth into helping everyone else, making life easier. Because it's hard as it is getting a degree, just getting through the first year. And we need to help ourselves, we need to help our people. One last thing I want to talk about is lockdown. The thing with autism is that you have one issue. If you're lucky, you have one issue that affects all the other issues. So I suffer from alexithymia. Alexithymia is a condition where you cannot tell another person's emotions, and where you cannot detect your own emotions. And even if you learn how to do that, you will still battle. It's like you are emotionally blind, and your brain will not let you detect it. And even if you do detect a person's emotions, you will still make errors, like a blind person using a cane but still bumping into things. There have been so many times where I have insulted people without knowing them, when I've been racist or classist or ableist, or have said the wrong thing at the wrong time at the wrong place. I think we've all had embarrassing issues like that, but my entire life has been that, and the lives of many autistics have been like that, just one constant stream of embarrassment. I think if you see the Big Bang Theory and you think of all the opportunities people have to humiliate other people, and the way social media persecutes people, and the psychological issues people have with depression, the levels of suicide, the levels of mental strain. People are breaking down, people are dying, people are dropping out. If you think of the crisis that we have right now, that's all based on communication. Even people without ADHD or autism or depression have issues talking and understanding each other. We have an increase in wars because of that. But we can decrease that by learning how to communicate more effectively with each other. Communication is the backbone of our civilization, and we really underestimate that until we have an issue. Communication is never taken seriously until there's a problem and you have no choice but to take it seriously. So in conclusion, that's what we're here to do. Action in Autism is here to help people with to help people with autism, their caregivers, and we're here to collect more information and create more awareness and create more opportunities for our people with Action in Autism, because it's not just the people with autism who are suffering. If we can help them, if we can help the most vulnerable, then the care that we give to the most vulnerable can carry on to the rest of us. Every single one of us who have issues can have those issues resolved. Mahatma Gandhi once said, "You should not judge a nation or a people or a country or a group or any institution by its achievements or by its wealth or its power. You must judge it on how it treats the lowest of the low. It's poor, it's dying, it's disabled. Because if they cannot treat them with decency, then how are they supposed to treat everyone else?" And we do, and at Action in Autism, that's what we do. We treat people with dignity, decency, for a better life for everyone and the people we love. Thank you.
A profound Prashant, who came to us and learned self-advocacy and learned how to self-representativity and learned that this is his integral human right to be and to have a different brain. So we're going to do a little exercise right now, and I need you in pairs. So if you're not sitting next to somebody, could you go and sit next to somebody? Because I need you in pairs. Okay, so I need you in pairs. And then the one will be number one. So in the pairs itself, can number one put up their hand? Yeah, okay. The two of you, number ones. Would you go and sit next to one of them over there? All the number ones, put up your hands. Yeah. And your number two, put up your hand. Great. Rule is you are not allowed to use any spoken words. You can use gesture and you can do whatever you want to, but you cannot use spoken words. Okay, and you can do that right now. Tell them what you had for breakfast. And of course, number two has to guess what it is that you are doing, what it is that you have.
The symbol. No. Yes. For breakfast.
Are you done? Okay, some of you are busy still. Okay, I can see that most of you are done. So, can I have you, young lady over here from Brazil, can you tell us, as the communicator, how did that feel? You can stand up.
I felt despair because I cannot explain what I ate with no words.
Despair because you cannot explain. From the one who was receiving, number 2, what was your experience?
It was frustrating.
Frustrating, yeah.
And feeling not able, feeling not at a loss.
At a loss, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Can I have another number 1 over there? Yeah?
For me, good morning. For me, I found it easier to express myself because I have a grandson who's autistic.
Ah.
So in most cases, he expresses himself by showing us what he needs.
Right.
So fortunately for me and my partner here, she was able to understand what I was.
Excellent. So you guessed it? What did she have for breakfast?
She had, I said toast, but she had bread, but I must
Sandwich.
say, it was a
Sandwich.
sandwich. It made me very anxious. Because I thought, how am I going to do this? How will I guess what John had for breakfast?
Wow. Does anybody else want to give us their experience? Yeah? Yeah, that's right.
Well, I do agree, very anxious because I was like, okay, I'm misinterpreting, and then I'm making the autistic person now more frustrated because I'm not understanding their means of communication.
Okay, lovely. So the words that we have is frustrated, anxiety. Imagine living your life every single day trying to decode what people are trying to say to you.
Yeah.
And we have our faculties in terms of us having our executive function, in terms of us signing. Imagine if you have that information in your mind and you cannot get it across to somebody. Then that typifies what a lot of our autistic people, regardless of whether they are speaking, as in the case of Prashant, or non-speaking, as in the case of my son who's 23 years old. So you navigate this really, really tough world trying to decode what a neurotypical world. And the world's voice of communication is speaking. We depend on speaking to engage with each other. And the culture of speakers dominates this world. So those who struggle with communication, and that is fundamentally autism. Fundamentally, that is the diagnosis of autism. It's social interaction and communication. The ability for me to speak and you to listen, you to speak and me to listen, the turn-taking, how far we stand from each other, the proxemics, the non-verbal communication, and 70% of all communication is non-verbal. You will be able to read a room. If somebody is yawning, you know they are tired or they're bored. So we are able to get these non-verbal cues all the time. Autistic people are walking through a maze. And the misunderstanding that happens is so huge. Prashant has a degree. He's the chairperson of the organization. But there was a small miscommunication with what Prof. James had said to him. He didn't understand that he needed to just introduce himself and then continue to speak. Okay? But we went with the flow. He wasn't even conscious that that was happening. So, that's just a little bit of walking in the shoes of an autistic person, but I want you to know that it's fundamentally about communication. More than 70% of our people are non-speaking. And those non-speakers struggle even more. Because when you find an autistic person pacing up and down, or rapping, or flipping, or flicking their hands, immediately you think they don't have an intellect. Immediately you think they cannot think for themselves, and you write them off. So as educators in this room, some of you prospective educators, you are going to encounter people who struggle with communication. And I'm going to give you 1 or 2 tips obviously it's a long process in terms of understanding, to how you can support, and it's called reasonable accommodations in terms of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, the reasonable accommodations that you can provide, like you provide a white stick for those who are blind and teach them how to navigate the world, like you provide maybe cochlear implants for somebody who's deaf, or they learn the culture of sign language. You too will provide supports to your autistic learners. And Prof. James mentioned to you that we call them autistic people. That's because there's a group of autistic advocates, and they are a large majority in the world, that have said, call us autistic. We want to be known as autistic people. The disability first, because it is a neurological condition. You take away the autism, you don't have the person. It's an integral part of who they are, how they perceive the world. Okay? And how they perceive the world is how then they would react to the world. Okay? So this is taken from an amazing book. It's called You're Gonna Love This Child, or this learner, by Paula Kluth. So if you ever try to get hold of Paula Kluth's book, I took the title from her. You're going to love this kid. And we have 32 little ones at Action in Autism in our Early Childhood Development Center. We have 18 adults in our adult skills and business transfer. So we know autism. We're surrounded by autistic people every single day of our lives. And we've been doing this from 2006, when Action in Autism was founded. So, what are the differences that you're going to encounter with autistic people? Number one, we said it's predominantly a communication difference. It's how that part of the brain, how that controls communication, that is different from yours and mine. So fundamentally, they have a different brain. And there is a concept called neurodiversity. And what do I mean by neurodiversity? It means that, like you get different ways of being in terms of the disability community, you also get different brains. And these brains can be ADHD brains, they can be autistic brains, they can be neurotypical brains like yours and mine. So, we are all part of this neurodiverse community. And that's what you need to learn, that our brains are different. So many autistic people have communication differences that affect speech and language, and many use few or no spoken words. I also want to speak to you a little bit about Prashant. Prashant has never been to America, but one way in which that allows him to communicate with people and makes him feel much more comfortable is assuming an American accent. It allows him to take on a persona which will enable him to be in social situations. Okay? For those who do speak, their speech may have unusual qualities. For instance, they may have unusual speech intonation or use repetitive speech. And you take everything that your learner, your autistic learner that you encounter, you take it as though they mean what they say. That every communication attempt has a meaning, okay? So if, for instance, my son, when he was little, he would say cookies and milk whenever he saw Barney. But immediately that was my cue, that he cannot say, I am hungry, but he wanted food, okay? There's a little one, we're housing the family because they're in crisis. It's an autistic mom, a mother with an autistic son, and he keeps on throwing stones in the neighbor's pool, right? And so you have the neighbor calling and saying, oh, Lisa, you know, they have this, and I've had to pick up 20 stones today, etc. He wants to go into the pool. He loves water. He's non-speaking. But how does he show us that? How does he show us that? And that's what I needed to explain to the neighbor. Okay? You become little investigators, that everything has a meaning, and behavior is communication when they don't have a reliable means of communication. So that's why at Action in Autism, and you're going to hear from Azra, our speech language therapist, we start communication, providing a reliable means of communication from a very, very early age. It's called alternative augmentative communication. I don't know if you want to hold up one of those communication boards so people can see it. So we start from a very, very young age. And if you ever encounter a mom or a dad, number one, you try and get them out of crisis mode because they usually start grieving. Now imagine your parents grieving over you. Do you not think you're going to feel that? So we try and get our parents out of crisis mode as soon as possible because there's so much to do. We have to give our babies a reliable means of communication. We have to say this, autism's never going to go away. Their brain is always going to be this way. But how can we support them to be enabled, to be empowered, to be part of our world? Okay? So alternative augmentative communication is one thing. If you encounter a mom who's going through a crisis or any caregiver, you say, start that immediately. Start reading to your kid. Start conversing with your kid because that's the circle of communication. You need a communicator and you need a communication partner. And when our children don't speak, the caregiver stops speaking. So that whole circle, that entire loop of providing that rich bed of communication and words is lost because the child is not giving the neurotypical cues. There's no, maybe hardly ever, any eye contact because autistics will tell you, I cannot look at your face, which is so extremely expressive, and listen to what you are saying. I'm a monoprocessor, so I have to look this way and listen to you. But when you see a person doing that, you think that, oh my God, they're so rude. Okay? And Prashant spoke to you about this miscommunication all the time. He comes across as though he's rude. And think about that, because they don't know the right intonation. They don't know the pausing. They might interrupt a conversation. They might speak endlessly about their passion project, not realizing you're giving them all the cues that you want to run away. So think about people who live on the margins of society, trying to decode who we are and how we operate in this world. Okay. So their conversational timing might be wrong. Their rhythm might be difficult. Autistic people might also struggle with using language. For example, difficulties using pronouns, us, me, I, and you often find that with our little autistics. Or learning the rules of conversation. Others may find figurative language, example, jokes or metaphors. Lend me your ears. I had an autistic person stand back and say, what's my word? You know, do you literally want me to take your ear? So say what you mean and mean what you say, but also if you are supporting a person with difficulties with communication, you use literal language, you slow down language, you use their names, and you use lots of pausing. And for some, multiple mode of communication. And we're going to speak to that. As educators, the visual is imperative. And the visual helps not only autistics, but they help everybody, right, within your classroom. So they may have difficulties with expressive or receptive communication, have trouble sharing their thoughts, and Prashant spoke about alexithma, not being able to know what the other person is feeling. So some refer to it as a mind blindness. They have their own concept of what it is you are trying to say. For instance, I often use this example. Her name was Amanda Black, and an adult autistic who's an advocate as well for the rights of persons with autism. And she said her dad left on a work excursion. Mom was alone with all the children, and the local pastor called. And the local pastor said, hi, is Mom at home? And she said, no, yes, Mom's here. And she put the phone down. So what was her concept? What do you think she was thinking? She was thinking, he's phoning out of concern. He wants to know if Mum is here. But what was he doing? He was asking to speak to Mum. So there was just this little communication blip. But he would have thought, my word, she's so rude. She just shut down the phone on me. Okay, and there's another funny story of a mother. Her son answered the phone, and she had the tomato bottle, and she was hitting the bottle, right, to get the tomato sauce out. She's a very religious woman in Parada and all of that. And her son answered the phone, and the lady on the phone said, what's your mom doing? And he said, oh, she's hitting the bottle. So lots of communication misunderstandings can happen. Okay? There are also the social differences. And there's a common stereotype that autistic people are not interested in social relationships. And this is from John Alder Robertson, and he says, nothing could be further from the truth. I really, really wanted to be with people. And all those child psychologists who said John prefers to play by himself are dead wrong. I played with myself because I was a failure at playing with others. And Prashant will also say to you that he realized he was autistic but around about 10 years when his mum says, where are all your friends? And he had no friends. So it's a very, very lonely journey. Okay? I was alone as a result of my own limitations, and being alone was one of the bitterest disappointments of my young life. So they do need time alone. They need time alone to decompress. And after speaking to all of you, and day before yesterday, we had a speaking commitment. Oh, was it yesterday? On a radio station, and Prashant came with me. He needed to decompress. So he needed to go away from a social situation because he's always on his guard. He's always, what is happening? What are they saying? Did I get the joke? What did they do? And so he needed to just get away, where he doesn't have to think any longer. So highly socialized environments, and a lot of our parents will complain. You know, the teacher says the child is so good, but when he comes down, he has an absolute meltdown. That's because of the volcano model, whatever. It builds up, I've had to behave myself, sit on a chair, I've had to look at the teacher, I've had to do this, I had to play on the playground, and poof, when the child gets home, there's a huge explosion. And they just need to decompress, especially if mom puts on further demands on that child. Some claim that being with people is not challenging, but the things that accompany being with people, conversation, compromise, make building friendships very difficult. Social situations can be difficult because they lack the skills necessary for successful, typical social interactions. For example, reading subtle social cues. If a person yawns or begins putting on their jacket, most people would read this as a signal that the person is getting ready to end the conversation and go home. Okay? So, just one example. You're trying to get to your destination, but someone is in your way. And what would we say? Oh, please excuse me, and that person would pull you aside. But this autistic is trying to get you to understand how complex that whole communication incident is for them. Firstly, you have to say excuse me loud enough so that they can hear you. Not too loud so that you're yelling. Be close enough to them that they can hear and that they know you're talking to them and not to anybody else. You cannot interrupt their conversation, so you can't be rude and just say, excuse me. You have to say it with a perfect tone and body language so you don't seem rude. If you were already angry or stressed about something, you have to forget about that in order to not accidentally show this in your body language, at being forced to interact with someone. You know that it would probably be easier to just try and squeeze past them or wait, because that's how difficult just that one communication episode is in their life. We take this for granted. criteria. What you would say repetitive movements, what you would say is routine, wanting routine and predictability and wanting to do the same thing. Example, hand flapping, rocking, finger licking. And these behaviors can be seen as movement differences. It affects their posture, their actions, their speech, etc. Some of them may even move and walk differently, or engage in excessive movements, example, rocking, hand flapping, pacing, or produce speech that is unintentional, stutter or struggle to make transitions. That's a huge thing, transitions from one place to the next. And when you add this into the communication part, the difficulties with communication, then you can see how people really struggle. Because as soon as you see an autistic doing something strange, even though we have our own obsessions, some of us will click a pen, some of us will shake our hands, but ours is obviously not out there, right? So when they have these large, big motor movements that everybody can observe, it's their way of calming their central nervous system. So the rocking and the pacing. So if a learner needs to move in order to process what it is you're saying, then you would say, sit down, I'm speaking, right? You're not going to accommodate that kind of learning style. But here's the challenge to you. If that child does not move, if you do not provide that constant movement breaks, then that child is not learning anyway. And at the same time, they're really struggling. Okay? They're struggling to be quiet, to sit there and listen to you, and basically they're not listening. They're not hearing anything that you say. So these kinds of rocking, pacing, wanting sameness and predictability, so you will have a visual routine timetable in your classroom. And you may even have a separate timetable that's addressed just for them on their desk. And you will point to what is happening in the class at any given time. And you will take nothing for granted to support their communication difficulties by speaking out loud what it is you are doing. And that is tough for teachers to learn, because you're so taught in such a structured way that to think out of the box and allow a child to rock, or if that's not harming any of your other learners, let them be. Allow for diversity. Okay. They also have these fascinations, what we would refer to as obsessions, but they love certain things. They love the deep interest. And we know that Albert Einstein, we don't know this for sure, but he was, people claim, scientists claim that he was on the spectrum. And he writes how he learns about the theorem of relativity. He rode his bike every single day. And he watched the oscillation of these wheels going round and round and round. And you'll find a lot of our people love to look at things that have symmetry or that spins round for long periods of time. And that's how he came up with the theorem of relativity. The other thing we know that we are guilty of as neurotypicals is that we often equate a functionality, a person that's able to drive, brush their teeth, comb their hair, have a bath themselves, with intellect. But if you think about Professor Stephen Hawking, he could do nothing. He could only move the irises of his eyes to communicate. And yet he was one of the greatest scientists of our time. So just ask you to rethink how we think about intelligence and how people can contribute to the world. Okay. So some fascinations are unique. Some love the trains. One had a fascination with the number 24. Another was fascinated with slugs, firearms, recycled symbols. I once went to a radio interview with an autistic, and on air he said, because he had a huge fascination with the Titanic, right? And he'd seen the movie a million times. He knew the entire story, how it was built, etc. And he made an appeal that he wants a copy of the Titanic. And then the interviewer on the radio station said, well, what are you going to do with the ship? And he said, well, I'm going to sink it. And that made sense to him. So these are the obsessions that are of special interest, and this comes from Carly Fleischman's Facebook page. But how beautiful this is, how they make them feel, okay? So we spoke about unusual sensory experiences. If I listen to this room, I can shut out the sound of the laptop. I can shut out the movement of people. There's a ticking sound that I hear in the back. But imagine a person who cannot shut out all these stimuli, okay? And they're all hearing these sounds at once, including my voice. And they would need then to orientate themselves in a space. But we don't allow them that orientation time. You know, with somebody saying, focus in on what the lecturer is saying. Or you have a transition coming into this room to support them so that they know they need to focus in on what the lecturer is saying. So it can be very overwhelming for them when they initially walk into a new sound environment. Okay? So they feel their senses very, very strongly. Whether, I don't know if these are fluorescent light or halogen light, a simple thing like that. We've changed all our lights at actually autism to LED or halogen lights because we know fluorescent light give off a flicker that can be very disorientating to autistic people. Okay? Things we take for granted. Clothes, fluorescent or intense food with unappealing textures or tastes, speech that is too loud or too fast, unexpected or painful sounds, perfumes or strong odors, chaotic visual fields, rooms that are too warm or too cool, scratchy clothing, okay? And then to say, if you've met one autistic person, you should meet a hell of a lot more because they're super great people. Just to go over some of the educational supports for autistic people, provide trustworthy and positive supports, okay? Build a relationship of trust. They have been lied to because they take you literally so much in their lives. They've been so marginalized and stigmatized for who they are and the brains that they have. Okay, they have a strong sense of justice, black and white justice. And if you treat them unfairly or you treat others unfairly, they will feel it. And if they don't have the language or the speech to communicate to you, you'll have difficult behaviors acted out. So it teaches you to be honest. Don't sweat the small stuff as an educator. If a person wants to watch something over and over, that's okay. If they need to spin something in their hands in order to listen to you, that's okay too, okay? Be kind, they're always struggling, okay? Reframe the behavior. This, I love this meme because it says, kids do well if they can, and you know Ross Green. I think you all know Ross Green and his book. We need to differentiate between won't and can't yet. So what is our adult mindset? Oh, judgmental, look at this idiot, can't do it. Rather curious, why can't they do it yet? Or a view of a child and we see them as willful, defiant, rude, but are there too many stresses in the classroom? Do they have skills deficits that actually can't do it? They don't have the executive function, or they could do it the day before, but today, because they had such a bad start to the day, and that little volcano is rising, they actually can't do it at this moment. I'm not going to judge, I'm actually going to just let them have a break now, okay? What are your thoughts as an educator? He's lazy, he just wants attention. Oh boy, he's rude. What's getting in their way? How can I help? Is the mindset we want. You want to do rewards and punishment? You find and remove barriers, okay? So what's the child experience in a classroom? Frustrated, guilt, shame, or they can either be supported and strengthened. Focus on relationships and building and connecting, and you build the relationship by being trustworthy, by saying what you need, by honoring their choices. I think that's an important one. Honoring their human rights and their choices, by embracing difference. It's okay to jump up and down and then come back and sit in your chair. You evaluate the instruction. Am I speaking in plain English? Okay? Am I speaking a lot in metaphor? Is my routine not age appropriate? It's such a travesty of justice in this country that special needs schools, for those who are non-speaking and autistic, they're giving them the national foundation curriculum. Teaching them colors when they're 9 years old. Hey, it's such a travesty of justice. Giving them this limited curriculum. You always assume highest intelligence. If you cannot assess the learner, you don't have the diagnostic tools, the test itself, that can tell you their intelligence. Okay. The instruction that is poor match for the individual's learning style, a very active child requiring to sit for long periods. Okay, an instruction that is incompatible with the person's challenges. Okay, I'm going to email this to you so you can disseminate it if you want to. Allowing fidgets and sensory comforts, not enough joy in the day, rules, instructions, and expectations that are explicitly clear. Tap into their interest. If they love the Titanic, put the maths problem as part of the Titanic. You get an answer immediately because that's their passion project. Okay? Find out a little bit about their world. We had a young woman who loved Bollywood. We finally just managed to get a mental health facility to take her on, because here again, in our country, there was not a single mental health home institution that would take her on because they felt her autism was too challenging. She stayed in hospital at 6 months at a time because nobody would take her in. So finally, we've got one in Pietermaritzburg that is taking her on. But here again, we don't know what the success rate is going to be. Teach new skills. Use visual schedules. Pick your battles. Okay? Offer safe spaces and breaks. That's so important, to set up a little safe space in your classroom, a little tent that they can fall inside, or have a respite room or calm down room. And keep it visual. You know, communication, you're supporting the communication. Visuals are permanent. Visuals allow time for language processing. They usually learn to read very, 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 very quickly. Why? Because they know that's a means to communication. They struggle with the spoken word because we are like prattle on and on. Okay? If I have my son and I said, go and get your shoes, he might have just heard the word go and he's gone. But he didn't hear the get your shoes part of it. So I need to support them by providing more than one means of communication. So I'll say, hey, go and get your shoes. Okay, so I'm giving you multiple modes of understanding what it is that I'm trying to say. Visuals help kids see what they mean. Visuals help all students. I did it myself. So using visuals within the classroom also helps tremendously. And we can only win and become excellent educators if we collaborate, share, engage, and participate. Thank you very much.
How should I say good afternoon? You know, I was a student not long ago, and a speech language therapy student, and as part of our, scope of curriculum, we have to, accommodate those with special needs. And like as Prashant said, there is a massive, massive gap in the knowledge that we have and the support that we as professionals have in supporting those who require our assistance. And in terms of inclusivity, I personally will say from my personal experience that coming from an organization like UKZN, I think that there needs to be a serious update in terms of skills development to accommodate and support our people. Because coming from, my clinical practice in my, my KZN blocks as a student, I was put in situations where I really did not know how to conduct my therapy session. And I felt so helpless as a professional. And I felt so helpless, like I am not doing anything to benefit this child in any way. And only when I was faced with it on my own and I took the time to learn more about our people, that is when I started benefiting those as well as myself. So I'm not going to take much more time, but because Lisa has literally said my whole presentation about communication and how to support our people and how important communication is. So let me just speed past this. Okay, my objectives were to understand and identify communication barriers. Lisa has spoken about that. Understand the importance of providing that support for communication for autistics. Lisa has spoken about that. Okay, so now I'm just going to show you the strategies. Okay, so as we said, imagine not being able to demonstrate knowledge. Imagine not being able to choose food off a menu. Imagine not being able to argue or share secrets. Imagine not being able to give an instruction or socialize. If you can't communicate, you can't convey your needs and wants, you can't tell stories. You can't show what you know, you feel frustrated and isolated. You're at a higher risk of abuse and neglect. Relationships and independence are affected. So communication in autism, I'm not going to speak much about it because it has been covered. But when it is absent, it brings about social anxiety, not being able to read social cues, and cope in social interaction. It also becomes a very, very stressful experience. Isolation is because it limits the ability to form the relationship and feel that closeness and feel like you are a part of the community. You become people without an appropriate and meaningful way to communicate often express very aggressive and destructive behavior, such as self-harm or harm to others, and maybe due to being overwhelmed in a situation and not being able to communicate how or what is being felt. You will often see the tantrums and someone very quickly escalating from a tantrum to a meltdown. It leaves room for vulnerability and learning difficulties as well, because as Lisa said, one mode of communication, our speech, is not going to be enough to process all of that information, which is why you need to give an additional support. Okay, so why is it important to support communication needs? It is a basic fundamental human right. Education must be available and accessible to all. Freedom of expression and language and culture being part and participating in your language and in your culture. And we need to implement inclusive thinking. So what does this look like? Right? We have equality, we say, okay, equality, but we need equity. That additional box is the support that we need to give our autistic learners. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. How can we give that additional box? How can we give that step in that ladder to achieve that success? Okay. Alright, so alternative and augmentative communication, AAC. This is a tool that facilitates communication and language development in all children, neurotypical and neurodiverse. It can be used in all environments. It can be aided or unaided. It can be low-tech or high-tech. Aided is sign language or Makaton. So Makaton, gestures. So when we are talking, we're always using gestures, head nodding, head shaking, that always does, that's another mode of communication. Aided are our pictures, communication boards, books, written expression, tablets, computers, and other electronic devices. So this is an example of a visual schedule. I don't know if everyone at the back got to see our visual schedules as I was going around, but this is just an example where you have that structure to allow you to understand and it reduce the anxiety of what's coming next, because Lisa said that our people are always anxious and they have difficulty transitioning between one activity to the next. So when you have that support there, they know what's coming next. Okay, so this is get off the bus, go to the gym, then it's bathroom time, circle time, snack time. So we have this at our school. It works brilliantly. Our children have our visual schedule up and they have their names under each activity, and once the activity is done, they move their name to the next activity. So it helps ease that transition between activities. Okay, we have our communication pod books where this is portable. You take it around with you, you flip it, and we have our core words, So the words that we use most frequently, and then on other pages are, for more for different environments, different activities, and different needs. Then, as I said, we have low-tech and high-tech devices. So our low-tech devices are our communication boards, our visual schedules, those that you can print, and then it goes right up to using very high-tech devices like tablets and speech output devices. Okay. And then adapting your communication style, be wary of the style and how much spoken language you use. Modify and simplify your language. Use clear language and provide additional processing time before repeating what you are saying. You support individuals to take turns in conversations. Provide additional question prompts if you misunderstand their message. Support understanding of content that is not explicit, like making inferences. Our people have difficulty understanding content when it's not explicit and it's not clear. Okay, change communication to match the context and the needs of the listener. Break up an instruction into parts and support with visual. First we're going to do this, and then we are going to do it. Provide instructions in chronological order. Always use more than one mode of communication to supplement understanding. Always assume competence and intelligence. Always communicate with the individual regardless of establishing joint attention or not. Recognize and allow the stimming behaviors such as rocking and flapping that may be used to convey how an individual is feeling. Use social stories. This is a wonderful tool because our people have difficulties with coping in social situations. So our social stories are individualized and personalized to help our people cope in different social contexts. Use visual schedules to support and cope and adjust to changes. Okay, avoid using non-literal and ambiguous meanings of language. Avoid using rhetorical questions. Avoid using imperative language, like don't do that. Rather use declarative language. I see that you are feeling anxious. Let's maybe go outside for a walk. If the child is, for example, exhibiting screaming or is overwhelmed or is really, disrupting the class, we would take the child and we would isolate the child in their calm down space in our respite room, and we will give them options to regulate depending on their individual social profile, individual sensory profile. Please do not ignore the individual or exclude them from conversations, especially when they are demonstrating difficulties with non-verbal communication such as eye contact, gestures, and body language. And please do not surprise autistic people. They really, really do not take well to it. And change of routine, and do not change their routine without prior warning. Okay, and that's it for me today. Thank you so much for listening.
Initially were two questions. Why should we have this presentation? And secondly, what is your role in all of it? We're not going to ask for responses. I think the presentation itself spoke to those very questions. And what we need to understand is, as teachers, what are we doing about it? And one of the things that I really wanted was for Ed Cycle as well to come through, and for our students to speak, and maybe that's the next presentation that we go into is, so what are we doing? Are we talking about special needs education, specifically with regard to autistic children? And we really need to know that in our classrooms we do have them. I spoke to somebody who runs an early childhood center out in Wentworth, and it was probably about a month ago. She sent me a WhatsApp and she said, oh my Lord, the number of children, autistic children within the Wentworth area has increased dramatically. So if she's picking it up in her center because she's aware of it, what is happening in children in other centers? not aware of it. And she's doing something about it, but these children are now going to go into a primary school where the teacher's not even going to be aware about it. And then what happens then? So I do want to say thank you so much, every one of you, for being present. Remember, you are the eyes, the ears, the presence for all children, not just some children. Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you so much to Prashant. And we have, out of community engagement, I did not tell the committee, and I see a committee member here, because you know in community engagement sometimes I shoot from the hip, but from my personal funds I have made an honorarium to Prashant of 500 Rand, and Prashant is obviously part of the skills program at the school, and they really do not earn much money at all. So thank you so much, absolutely. Thank you. And then a donation to the school of 1,000 Rand. Oh, okay. We need to give that to you. You didn't, I need to put my pants up and then for Lisa, cute. I think you take a photo with all of them. Lisa? Questions? Are there any questions that people would like to ask? And I'm quite sure, I must tell you, Lisa is absolutely phenomenal. Any type of information that you require. One of the things that we were even saying to some of our students is that they could go and do service learning at the school, and we have spoken about that. So, yeah, the school is in Durban North, and I'm quite sure Lisa would be able to respond to any questions. Are there questions? Yes?
I do have a question.
Yeah.
I do have a question, Angela. The first one is, in fact, I have a whole lot of questions, but I'll ask maybe about two. The first question is, are teachers allowed to say that this child is autistic, or it has to be someone who is a specialist who has to then diagnose and confirm that the child is autistic?
I think, of course, if you suspected, I would get, because a lot of parents go into denial, I would definitely tell the parents. We also run a free clinic. So we have a lot of teachers who've taken over the role as caregiver, main caregiver to the child, especially if the child lives in hostels, and they get bused to our free clinics. And we have a pediatric neurologist who gives free service to Action in Autism, because they are such a scarce expertise. It's very hard to find that kind of expertise in our country, and they usually wait months before they actually meet an expert. So we run these free clinics, and they come, and sometimes we'll have a marathon clinic with 30 learners to pediatric neurologists, and we diagnose a lot of first timers, because it's so clear when you're getting diagnosed at age 10, 11, 12. And it's also a travesty of justice that you're getting diagnosed at that age, because then you're mistreated all along for your condition. So I think it's really imperative that if an educator suspects that they actually get through to the right resource, we can send you the modified MChat. And it was a study done at UKZN by Professor Kachalia, who did the study on autism within a local context and modified the screening tool for the MChat. We have copies of that, and we will disseminate it to anybody and everybody if they suspect, well, this child definitely seems to be autistic.
If I may add, to further answer your question, so not necessarily telling the parent or saying, okay, this child is autistic, so we have to be very sensitive, because it's a very, very, life-changing experience for our parents as well, to not alarm them in such a state that they are actually, going into like panic mode. I think we have to be very mindful of how, we do alert and bring attention to
we work from a human rights perspective. So
Yeah.
we like our autistic people to take ownership of that. You know, and if they do it from a young age, then they feel empowered because then they can self-advocate for accommodations wherever they go.
I'm just gonna add,
Sorry, I think, you same question.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
just to add on, I've had some history teaching at a disadvantaged school for a very long time, and there's a very lengthy process when a teacher suspects that something is wrong with the child. A lot can go wrong as well if a process of sorts is not followed because the department can charge you for misdiagnosing. So it's very sensitive, and it has to be clear that the parents understand because they can go back and sue the school or do a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's like a very lengthy process.
Yeah.
I think Jabu had another
Yes,
question. She said two, that's her second.
One last question. I don't know whether to call it a question or a comment. I'm asking because, like I've already indicated that I have a grandson who is autistic. He's now 12. He's not non-verbal, but he can't construct a sentence. When we realized that he is autistic, it was from the ECD teacher, because he used to stand next to the fan and then imitate the sound. And I'm so happy, all that you have been presenting here are the things that I also observed from him. And then the teacher just said, oh, this child is autistic, you have to take the child to the specialist and whatnot. And it was very difficult for his mother. I had to give him that kind of a psychological support, and eventually the child was autistic. Then this question that I want to understand, what is the correct term? Because I'm also writing a lot about autism. Yes, there are 2 papers in pipeline that are going to be published very soon. The first one is on autism and COVID-19. I was very happy when Prashanta was talking about that. And then the other one is autism and reading. How do I teach grade R learners to read who are autistic in my classroom? So I'm very much interested in autism. The thing is, I want to know now, is it autistic learner, a learner with autism, or a learner on the spectrum? What is the correct term? Because from what I read was, if you say autistic learner, you are putting the diagnosis, the condition before the learner, which somehow then labels the learner. And when you say it's a learner with autism, then what about, for instance, myself, I'm obese, anyone can say that. But no one says job with obesity. And then learners on the spectrum. Which one is the correct term from those?
Look, these are from autistic advocates, but they come predominantly from the Western world, right? And they very clearly have articulated that their brains are different. They process things differently. They perceive the world differently. And so being called autistic is what they want to be called. So not the person first, but you know the UN Convention says person with disability. But they specifically said, call me autistic, autistic person, autistic learner. I don't know, because it's also about upbringing. We have quite a number of autistics that we encounter where they're brought up in a culture where it's fearful, you know, for them to use the word autistic because they mean something's wrong with them. And so some might reject it, but we say claim your right to be who you are.
And embrace who
And
you are.
embrace who you are. I don't know if Prashant.
Well, I identify as a person with autism, but it depends on the cultural context. Because like Lisa said, a lot of the literature is very Western, and a lot of their information has gaps. Because you have different social norms in each culture. And you just gotta find ways to apply those social norms so that it's so that it's applicable to that culture and to your language. And think of how you fit in to your culture, what your norms are, what is appropriate at the time, or how to introduce yourself normally. And try and apply that to how they perceive it, how the person with autism would be preferred to be perceived, and how you would like to perceive them. You know, for example, your son, how do you introduce him to people usually? You say he has autism, or that he's a person with autism, or rather, what is appropriate in certain social settings where, could you give us an example?
Usually, when we go to a restaurant, for instance, he paces and then tries to take other people's food.
Okay.
And then I say, oh, don't mind him, he has autism.
Lisa?
But now, is he conscious that you're referring to him as such? Sorry, I lost an earring, so that's what I'm looking for. But it's okay. Is he conscious that, I mean, he knows you're referring to him, and does it make him feel hurt? So my son, very clearly, he doesn't use words, he doesn't speak, but he uses this particular communication, and it's called a VOS, this particular one, or I will take his iPad along, and he will say, call me autistic. And so even if your little one is little, you can ask them by writing, how would you like to be referred? And you'll say, autistic, person with autism, point. And they can point and tell you how they would like to be referred. Because consulting with them would be extremely important. I think that asking a person,
I've seen
how
other
do you
children, I've
communicate?
seen other children t-shirts written, I'm autistic.
Yeah. So this was our initial t-shirts. We now have reprinted this to say, I support autistic people. But you heard from Prashant, he said he wants to be referred to as a person with autism. So I have to respect him. My son says he referred to me as autistic. I have to respect that. So it's just up in the air. Also, for political reasons and because we need money as a non-profit, person with autism is how government refers to them, or person with disability. I want to use that terminology to fight the fight. But you also asked a very important question about reading. And before I get you to Azra, a lot of them use Gestalt learning. So they would learn huge chunks of words. And instead of learning phonics and this and this and this, some of them, and usually some of them can be hyperlexic. They can learn to read very quickly.
Yes.
Okay? So you must be aware of it. That's a talent, that's a strength, right? We find a lot of our little ones who are really reading sentences. Okay? And what does it mean to learn? You learn, Gestalt learning is you learn huge chunks, and you might have between the humming or the buzzing sounds that they'll say, move away. Or my son will be talking, making a sound, stop. And you take that seriously. He's telling you to stop it, stop doing something that you're doing around his presence. So that's Gestalt learning. They can learn huge chunks of language. And sometimes they're so visually acute, just at the corner of their eye, they see the whole thing. And you still saying, look at the picture. They've seen it and they know where it is. So trust them.
Like, for example, one of our learners.
Can you be a bit louder?
Sorry, no, one of our learners, we recently had him come this term. He does not want to sit in his seat, but as soon as you allow him to walk around freely, and then you have the material that you want him to pay attention to or look at, he'll walk past it and he'll read, because he's hyperlexic. He'll walk past and he'll read the word.
So be sharp. You think they don't, you think, oh, did my son at 2.5 years old just spell tree? Well, yes, he did.
Yeah.
He said T-R-E-E.
Oh my God, yeah.
So believe in them. I mean, he may not be able to do it the next day, but you know he has the knowledge. It's just that mechanism of moving the mouth in the right way and moving these muscles to actually speak.
We need to cut.
Oh, okay.
And one more thing, I'd like to
Yeah,
conclude.
one more.
So I'd like to conclude. So Azra and Lisa have talked about clues that you can develop and communication systems that you can help them to use. So you can also use that in conjunction with pronouns with cultural norms and the situation. For example, we need to create awareness. So in that area, we use the word people with autism. So that communicates that the role of the organization. I am a person with autism. So in that context, I'm saying that I prefer to think of the idea of the person first. And autism is a condition which I deal with. So, and it goes according to those factors. So just, you kind of feel it around. It depends on the appropriateness of the situation, what people are comfortable with, and what skills you can use to communicate those to others and yourself and to the person with autism. So if anybody has any more questions.
I think that was the last statement. And I do want to say thank you so much. I mean, there's been so much learning just about autism, and yet our children with special needs have so many other conditions as well. Thank you so much.